Hi, and welcome to Bradford Transformed environmental discussion. And we're going to be opening with a Commoners Choir Go Trespassing video. The video should be starting now. Well, let me just tell you a little bit about Bradford Transformed whilst that video starts. Bradford Transformed is based on the world transformed idea, and it aims to bring art and politics to the heart of Bradford and the surrounding area. We had a festival back in November showcasing lots of different local talent and conversations around what we thought we needed to change in our immediate area to bring our communities together, to think about the way art and society link together and work together. And I've got some fantastic speakers today, including from Sarah, West Yorkshire, who are the Socialist Environment and Resources Association, who are affiliated to the Labour Party. I'll have Hugh Goulburn speaking to us about Sarah. We'll also have Bradford Shipley Travel Alliance, Ludi Simpson, who's been right at the heart of so many different things in our communities to try to bring positive change. The Fossil-Free West Yorkshire Pension Fund, Ali Stouffer will be talking to us about the different things that can happen in our communities again through different organisations, especially the financial side, to make sure that we are supporting the right kinds of things moving forward. We've got the Group Against the Lead Bradford Airport expansion. Alistair Cameron and Manny Mackenzie will bring us various bits of information. And we have Paul McHugh from Bradford Extinction Rebellion talking to us about citizens' assemblies. All of these people have lots of different points to make. You have an opportunity, if you have questions to ask, to copy out, write them into the link below, and we'll have a look at those questions and see if we can put those to any of our panel. We'll also have music from Commoners Choir. Commoners Choir are legendary. They have been going for a number of years now, and I'll have Gabby talking to us about a little bit about Commoners Choir and about the things that influence their music. Okay, I'm hoping we're going to see Commoners Choir now.
This little patch of common ground was precisely that, common, and all the richer for it.
When your heart says yes, but the sign says no, go where you're forbidden to go.
Hi. Fantastic. Welcome. Welcome to Bradford Transformed environmental discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. Just like to have just a moment's silence, please, just to think about what's happened with COVID over the last year or so. And we've reached the 2 million benchmark of deaths. Thank you. Obviously, COVID has been with us for a while now, and it will continue to play a big part in what happens in our communities locally around the world. And I'm sure we will touch upon that during the course of this discussion. Bradford Transformed is based on World Transformed, and it aims to bring art and politics to the heart of our communities, to Bradford and the surrounding areas. It follows on from an event we had in November, bringing lots of different artists and politicians and local people together to discuss how we could change and improve things in our community. I've got a number of different speakers today, and I'm going to start with Hugh Goulburn from Sarah, West Yorkshire. Hi, Hugh.
Hi, Pav.
Hugh now. Lovely to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about Sarah, West Yorkshire and your involvement with it, please.
Great, and hello to everyone on today's event, and thank you for inviting me to speak today, Pav, and to Sandy at Bradford Transformed. As you said, yeah, my name's Hugh Goulburn. For those in the event who don't know me, I'm a lawyer and an environmental activist, and also director of a £5 million renewable energy fund, and I live in Huddersfield, so just around the corner from Bradford. And why am I here today? Well, I guess some people on the call might know about my recent campaign to be Labour's candidate for West Yorkshire Mayor, and I will come back to some of the themes of devolution in a little bit. But as many of you might have heard me say on Zoom calls over the last few months, I've been committed to the environmental sector for over a decade, nearly 2 decades actually. And a lot of it comes down to my own personal experience. So as a young child, I spent some time in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. And I remember one of my first memories actually is of a very powerful hurricane that hit the island in the 1980s and caused quite a lot of destruction. And that made me realize the power of nature at a very, very young age. And when we fast forward to 2020 and I think of the power of nature, I have 2 very young daughters who are 2 and 4. And when I think of their future, it seems really, really critical to me that we do something about climate change and about the environment. So that's why I'm really committed to it now and have been for many years. I think across Yorkshire and very close to where you are in Bradford, we've obviously had flooding in West Yorkshire and in North Yorkshire. I was in North Yorkshire 18 months ago when they had really, really bad flooding. And so, I've been a part of CRA, as you said, Labour's environment campaign, the only official environment campaign that's affiliated to the Labour Party for 15, 16 years. I was the National Energy Coordinator for 5 years when I was based in London. In addition to that, I've also been involved in Yorkshire with the Carbon Capture and Storage Programme, and I'm still chair of a national fuel poverty campaign. And I know one of your other speakers, Ali Stouffer, and I are involved with a local fund here for renewables here in Kirklees. So I come to this call and to this event, I suppose, with quite a lot of expertise and with a lot of passion for this sector. And so I think it's really great that you've organised this for now at the start of 2021, because I see this for CERA, for the wider environmental campaign, as our year of opportunity. And you're right, Pav, you started this event quite rightly by acknowledging that at the moment, I think a lot of people's minds quite rightly are on the health crisis that we're affected by. I think it's in the time that we'll be speaking, over 100 people will have gone into hospital with COVID. So, no wonder people are worried about it, and rightly we're focusing on it. But as I say, 2021 has to be a year of action and opportunity on the climate agenda. Of course, at the end of the year, we'll have the international convention meeting and we're hosting it here in the UK in Glasgow. So, we must put a focus on that, and something must come out of that. And we've got an opportunity, I guess, for something to come out of that, given that we've now got a new president in the US, or will do from later this week. Yorkshire-wide, I think it's important that we keep an eye on the new Yorkshire Commission that's going to be set up. There should be some news on that this week, which has been set up by all the leaders of the various councils and by the Mayor of Sheffield City region. And I think the Mayor of West Yorkshire, whoever that ends up being, will also be committed to that. And then, of course, devolution for our area to Bradford, to Kirklees, and all of the 5 areas of West Yorkshire. The reason why I got involved in that, and I'll say a bit more about how I'm continuing to be involved, is because, you know, I think it's really important that we raise the profile of this debate, environmental debate, within this devolution deal. You know, I visited a lot of the groups around West Yorkshire during my campaign, Slow the Flow, who are part of SERA as well. You know, the White Rose Forest that I know is doing a lot in the Bradford area. In Leeds, we've got Urban Farms, we've got the Climate Innovation District. And I guess what I've seen when I visited all of those is the amount of innovation we've got in West Yorkshire, and the amount of opportunity we've got to do something different. And devolution gives us a chance to do more of that. And so that's why SERA in West Yorkshire, we've been really actively working alongside all the candidates and all the different councils for throughout the recent period, and we'll be continuing to do so over the next few months. I'm really pleased to be able to say on today's call that I spoke to our Labour candidate Tracy Braben recently. She's committed to working with SERA to reach out to groups like this, to groups across West Yorkshire, to help to come up with the most bold manifesto that any metropolitan mayoral candidate has ever come up with on the environment. And for me, I think there's 5 critical questions. Let me just end with this, Pav, that I think we need to answer. And, you know, I think today's a good chance to start to answer some of those questions. You know, the first one is who is going to deliver, you know, a safe, clean, affordable and reliable mobility service, a transport service, because transport is, you know, is obviously one of the critical issues in terms of the environment. You know, should it be national? Should it be regional? Should it be local? I think we need to think about some of those questions, and, you know, it'd be good to get some answers on that. The second thing is, what are the things we want to do to protect our natural environments, particularly around things like flooding and other things that affect local communities? When should we upgrade our outdated housing system? You know, I see a lot within groups like this around retrofitting housing. One of the questions, and I've been working on this both with the fuel poverty hat on and with environmental hats within SERA and outside of SERA for a long time, is how do we actually upgrade our, you know, housing? I'm sat in a house that's nearly, well, over 100 years old, and actually you can't get this up to a passive house standard. So the reality is, when do we want to start doing something more ambitious on that? You know, I think that's a critical question for us. Where in the world should we be looking for inspiration? You know, we sometimes always look within the UK. There's a lot of nationalistic rhetoric at the moment, isn't there, of course? And sometimes we should perhaps look internationally for inspiration. And I guess critical question for us in this movement as well is, how can we deliver green jobs as well, you know, in terms of this whole agenda? Because, you know, you often talk green jobs to people and they're not really sure what that means, but we do need to do that, and we do need to ensure that there's a transition, and a just transition in terms of the job market. So I think 5 critical questions. Really looking forward to this debate. As I say, we are going to be bringing whatever we hear in these sessions and other sessions into a manifesto for the Labour candidate. We do have a session next Sunday, which I'll post to this group and to others, and hope many can join that, but really keen to be here, really happy to be here today so I can hear the ideas and be part of this really important debate. So thank you, and look forward to the rest of the session this afternoon.
Thanks, Hugh. That is an amazing CV. I'm really, really impressed, and I'm really pleased that you've joined us today. One of the questions I've got for you, if you don't mind my just as briefly as you can, over the last few years, under Corbyn, there was a big emphasis on having a green manifesto. We don't seem to have heard about that in the last few months from the Labour Party. I don't know if you could sort of sum that up in a sentence or two, if that's possible. I know it's a much, much wider debate. So for somebody like me who is interested, or as always are, all of us are on this programme, in having a proper green agenda, what's happened to the Green Manifesto that we did hear lots about, and now it seems to have been dropped?
It's a good question. I mean, in a couple of sentences, I suppose we did, some of us on this call were involved in a number of different events around the Green Industrial Revolution, you know, sort of going back 18 months, 24 months ago. And so I think some of that was picked up in terms of last year's manifesto. Of course, we were rather rushed into last year's election. I mean, all I can do is focus on the future. And as I say, I think it's really critical that for all of the elections we have this year, local elections and mayoral elections, assuming that they go ahead, that there are really ambitious kinds of manifestos for that. But just to reiterate the point that within SERA, what we want to do and what we want to see, and we've had some very positive discussions with our mayoral candidate here in West Yorkshire, is we want this to be a bottom-up grassroots manifesto. So something that really is something that is owned locally and comes from all of the different communities, and something that resonates with local people.
Thanks, Hugh. That's I feel like you're a safe pair of hands, and I feel like you're saying the things that I want to hear. Obviously, action speaks much louder than words, and we'll see as the discussion develops and as time goes on how effective that is. Thank you very much, Hugh.
Thank you.
So moving on to Ludi. Ludi's going to talk to us about the Bradford Shipley Travel Alliance. Hi, Ludi Simpson. Thank you very much for joining us. You are on mute at the moment, Ludi. If you could just unmute yourself, please. Thank you very much for joining us. Brilliant.
Hello. That's a bit better, isn't it? And
That's much better.
Let me just check the schedule. You're asking us each to speak for 3 minutes, and then a question, and then we go into wider discussion. Is that?
Yeah.
Great. So from me, I think first thing to say is we've come a really long way, because there's no doubt anymore, and this has only been in the last couple of years, that there is a climate crisis. So West Yorkshire does have a policy to become carbon neutral by 2038, and accepts that they need to be more than ambitious to achieve that. And they say it's needed because they acknowledge that if the temperature rises to near 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, then that will create a devastating impact on life on this planet, and there's not much time to avoid that. So traffic, it's the sector that contributes most to carbon emissions in the UK, and cars contribute much more than vans and lorries put together. Buses and trains contribute by far the least. So traffic is really important. There's some schools, including in Shipley where I live, that because of traffic have levels of particles in the air that's well above the internationally agreed limit. And people might remember just this last December, the London coroner who declared traffic pollution among the causes of death for 9-year-old Ella Kesey-Deborah. Where there's regular traffic pollution, it has a long-term effect on all children. So it's great news that Bradford Council says there must be less traffic overall, less traffic, and that every major road scheme must be assessed for its contribution to carbon emissions. And with that level of awareness, it's an opportunity, right? And that's the way the road scheme between Bradford and Shipley has been presented. Take some traffic off Manningham Lane, put it on to Canal and Valley roads, take pollution away from residential areas, and widen those roads, Canal and Valley roads, to take that extra traffic. At the same time, that will decrease congestion. And that's all within a designated clean air zone. But you won't be surprised to hear me say it's not plain sailing. Because West Yorkshire says at the same time that it won't actually apply its climate emergency policy to any of the schemes that are in the pipeline, and that includes this one. And widening the main road from Bradford to Shipley will attract more traffic from other roads. Government says that's what always happens. So it will increase congestion in Shipley itself. And yet there've been no forecast published for the amount of traffic or its impact on air quality as a result of the road. So my question will be, how can consultations and the approvals that have been made, how can they have passed even a low bar on environmental grounds when consultation has been without information? And that's a real issue. The scheme may not even reduce congestion on Canal Road itself. So I'm just going to finish with 2 principles that I think a council can take on board. And maybe we can explore these, what they might mean in the discussion. First is to put people first in planning. I think every planning scheme would do well to have a community panel that can scrutinise and have a seat at the table when the plans are developed. This isn't a new thing, but it ought to become routine. And then secondly, I reckon we should ensure people's welfare comes before private profit. Now, again, that's not new. It's what most regulations aim to ensure. But it needs to be seen as the first choice and not the last choice.
Really, that's fantastic. Lots of, I know you do lots of work in the background. How can we really change people's perception of how they ought to go about their daily lives? I think that's the crux of it, isn't it?
It's such a mixture of things, isn't it? It is how people go about their daily lives. But to be honest, I think the publicity about that and the changes in behaviour are quite amazing. And again, it's more recently because of the actions like XR, like Greta Thunberg, that don't make any difference in themselves, but they make the space for people to think, oh, actually, yeah, there's something does need to change. And that's for politicians too. It's those kind of very bold and eye-catching challenges. And it's not just about what we do, but it is about what the councils do, what national and, oh God, above all, international does that will make the difference between, and it is, you know, one has to say it, between life and death.
Ludi, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for pointing out what I should have pointed out earlier. We will hear from the speakers. I'll have a question or two for them, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards. Ludi, thank you very much. Stay with us though, please. And I've got now Ali Stouffer from Fossil Free West Yorkshire Pension Fund. Hi Ali, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi Pav, and thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm going to talk about money. My money, your money, our money. Other successful campaigns in the past, such as anti-apartheid and abolishing the African slave trade, were significantly boosted when people started to realise that their money was at risk. So continuing to invest in coal and gas and oil, given the need for drastic climate action across the world, is like trying to mop the floor without turning off the taps when the bath's overflowing. So our group, West Yorkshire Pension Fund, Fossil Free, is campaigning to get the fund to remove its investments from the fossil fuel companies that are driving climate change. Our pension funds hold large amounts of our money, and they invest it on our behalf to be able to pay our pensions. So fiduciary duty says that they've got to invest this to make sure it brings in a good financial return. However, climate risk is a financial risk, and it's the biggest risk to insurers and investors today. As Dr. Mark Carney said in his Reef Lectures last December, every financial decision should take climate change into account. So there's a real urgency and an opportunity to reorient financial system for the massive investment needed to create a sustainable economy. But there's still a huge complacency of many investors and companies who don't even know their own carbon budgets and or have any clear plans to achieve net zero. The West Yorkshire Pension Fund appears incredibly complacent about both this urgency and the opportunities for new investments. We're really worried that their investment on our behalf will end up as stranded assets, in other words, worthless. For example, analysis by the organisation Platform last November revealed that £211 million was wiped off our fund due to its oil investments crashing over the past 3 years. That's not just COVID. These investments in companies that are driving climate change are not investments for our future. Nor are they acting with fiduciary duty. They are destroying our future and that of our children and our grandchildren. The smart money nowadays is on investing in new and sustainable technologies, in renewables, and the kind of things that Hugh has mentioned earlier this afternoon. We're desperately worried that our pension fund is well behind the curve on this. And Bradford Council is the lead authority on the fund. It should be taking initiative on this key issue in line with its own commitments on climate emergency and the West Yorkshire commitments to get to net zero. So the question is, what do? We want Bradford Council to encourage and support the pension fund to divest from fossil fuels, and it has a key role in this. Other West Yorkshire councillors also have councillors on the investment panel for the fund. So it's important for those councillors to understand this issue too. So we want everyone who's concerned about the climate crisis to talk to their own councillors about this key issue. And if people think it doesn't apply to them because they're not a member of this particular pension fund, then there are other things you can do. If you're in another pension fund, or if you've got a bank account or a savings account or a building society account, all these funds, all these places hold funds that are potentially, and most of them do, investing in fossil fuel companies. So ask questions of your bank, of your building society or your pension fund, and move your money elsewhere if they can't give any satisfactory answers if you ask about climate risk. So if we don't stop funding climate crisis, we're all losing out. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. That's fantastic. And thanks for your passion there as well, and the research. I know that you do lots and lots of research, and you're really well informed in all the different things that you talk about. One of the things that it's going to be a common thread, I think, for the conversation today is the skepticism, not just at sort of ordinary level, people that we meet with, but the people who are in positions of power. What can we do about that kind of skepticism that will allow for us to start making changes?
I think we have to start from why people are sceptic about it, and I mean that's the whole of this afternoon will be about that. But I think we have moved beyond the scepticism about climate crisis. We're almost at the stage now where people are starting to try and look as though they've got green credentials. For example, BP. I went to their shareholders meeting AGM a couple of years ago, and it was in Manchester, and from all the big sort of signs and huge sort of posters on the walls and everything, you'd think they were a renewables company because everything was pictures of wind turbines or solar panels, and total greenwash. And they do invest very, very, very tiny amounts in renewables. That's true, but their main sort of business case, if you like, is about digging out fossil fuels, burning them and making money out of that. And while that is ever their business model, then we are struggling. I would love to see fossil fuel companies investing a lot more in renewables, and that could be part of the way forward, but certainly for the moment we're not seeing any sign of it. And until very recently, most of them were actually trying to push the climate denier thing. So yeah, we've got to look at where the money is, and what if we want to invest money in renewables, in new technologies, in bringing all our housing up to decent standards so that people aren't living in fuel poverty. We've got to invest directly in those things. Why do we keep investing in the fossil fuel companies that are driving the climate change?
Ali, thank you very much. Stay with us. I will come back to you, and thank you for answering my question. And we're going to move on to Galba, the group against the Leeds Bradford Airport expansion. And I think we've got Manny Mackenzie and Alistair Cameron. Hi, Manny. Hi, Alistair. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
I'll just be presenting this little bit, so just to put you in the picture. So yeah, my name's Manny, and thanks very much for inviting me along. I live in Bradford, but I'm also a member of Galba, which is the group for action on Leeds Bradford Airport. And Galba was really galvanised in late spring of last year when Leeds Bradford Airport, or LBA, submitted an application for planning approval to Leeds City Council. And their main emphasis was on having a lovely new carbon neutral terminal. But the real intention was to nearly double passenger numbers. And in order to do this, they would need to fly more at night. So very soon, it became clear that there were a number of very key areas where what Leeds Bradford Airport was submitting in their application turned out to be an area of contention that Galba was wanting to tackle. And the first of these is that Leeds Bradford Airport maintained that there are economic benefits to be expected. The second was that the environmental effects, for example, noise, pollution, and effects on health, would perhaps be minor. And the third area of contention, perhaps the most significant one, is that increased greenhouse gas emissions would be manageable at a time when really we need to be making drastic cuts in line with the Paris Agreements. So, what insights did we gain or have we gained as we've gone through this? The first is Leeds Bradford Airport is an investment company. It's an Australian investment company. It's driven by profits and shareholder dividends and not by climate and environmental concerns. However, they do take notice of local authority regulations and also national regulations, even though they may try and skirt them from time to time. The second major insight is that many politicians, councillors, and even MPs have only a superficial understanding of the issues. And this is actually quite understandable given the complexity of Leeds Bradford Airport's application. So for instance, there are almost 4,000 documents either supporting or objecting to this application on the Leeds website. And councillors, therefore, on the plans panel in Leeds, they rely heavily on briefings by their planning officers in order to try and make some sort of sense of the massive information. Now, the only snag is that there's a very cosy relationship between Leeds Bradford Airport and Leeds City Council planning officers. And who knows, this cosy relationship may even extend to other areas of Leeds Council and to West Yorkshire Combined Authority. So what's Galba's strategy been to try and counter, I guess, some of this information that Leeds Bradford Airport are putting forward? Well, firstly, it's terribly important to have accurate information and facts that are available for people. So Galba have built a website with, as I say, up-to-date and accurate information. Also, we use the media, newspaper and television, to inform and to counter Leeds Bradford Airport misinformation. Crucially, to build really good links with councillors, MPs, other campaigning groups, community and residents groups, to encourage objections to be sent. Fourthly, to fundraise in order to employ a barrister, because the legal context around the planning laws with regard to Leeds Bradford Airport is a very complex one, and it's changing all the time with High Court decisions and so forth. Next, to counter the economic arguments that were put forward by Leeds Bradford Airport, Galba actually commissioned the New Economics Foundation to analyse some of these arguments. And lastly, we're kind of using our links with academics at Leeds University who have got a large amount of expertise in climate sciences to just comment on Leeds Bradford Airport's environmental and emission figures. So all this effort is actually aimed at the plans panel in order really to provide a factual sort of counterbalance to what Leeds Bradford Airport have put in their application. But actually even more important, arguably, is it's for the public to inform, to stimulate discussion, to debate around really the close relationship between, firstly, the importance of having sustainable, secure local jobs, not the ones that Leeds Bradford Airport are claiming they will generate. Secondly, has to be much higher priority on environment and health. And thirdly, the overarching climate emergency and what this demands. And with, just to give a very brief example, the effect for, say, Bradford citizens in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, if the airport was allowed to expand, the emissions from the airport would use up approximately 20 to 30% of Bradford's entire carbon budget by 2050. So is that what we want to have our carbon spending going on? Okay, so just in terms of Bradford, therefore, I just have two final points. What does this mean for Bradford? I think there needs to be much more discussion around, what the climate crisis is, how our local airport is going to actually affect the calculations. And lastly, we need to move to strengthen Bradford Council's climate emergency resolution. It's there's lots of nice things in there, but we need hard targets and a clear roadmap, accurate measurement. And it's not just about the council's estate, it's about the whole council area that needs to be included in the agency.
Manny, like all our speakers so far today, really eloquently put, and obviously, you're speaking from the heart as well, and you've got research to back up what you've talked about. One of the worries that I have, we've briefly touched upon the pandemic when I opened the programme. One of the things that I've read more than once is people can't wait for the pandemic to be over so they can get on a flight to go somewhere. How do we counter that narrative that it's a basic right that people believe they have, that they can get on an aeroplane just as the same that they can get on a bus or a train or into their car? How can we counter that narrative as well as fighting the expansion?
Well, I mean, that's a tricky question. Really, it pits, your own personal, levels of freedom to engage in activities that you want to, versus perhaps wider reaching harms that might follow from that. And I know people have mentioned various things about having quotas of flying to try and still enable people to have the chance to fly, but maybe having very frequent flyers. And we know that a small proportion of people make the majority of air flights, to make it much more expensive for the frequent flyers, as a way of beginning to pay the true carbon cost of flying. So flying is terribly damaging in terms of the carbon cost. But there's of course also the point of, how do we want the remaining small amount of carbon emissions that we have left in Bradford, do we want to spend that on an airport? Or do we want to, do we have other things that we need to still maintain it for instance, heating of our houses and so on? These are difficult choices to make. And is spending it on an airport expansion, is that the right way to go about it?
Manny, thank you very much. Lovely talking with you, and we'll come back to you in a few moments. And I've also got with us today from Bradford Extinction Rebellion, Paul McHugh. Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for joining us. Lovely to see you. And you're going to talk to us about the citizens' assemblies this morning, aren't you?
Yeah. Every question you've asked so far, and I've got the answer right here. Brilliant. Okay, yeah. My name is Paul. I'm from Bradford Extinction Rebellion, XR, an international non-political climate action group. And I'm going to talk about citizens' assemblies and how they can help provide solutions to the climate and ecological emergency. Okay, first of all, we believe there's a crisis in representation. There's a concern about who do our MPs actually represent. Very few politicians have the support, trust and respect of the majority of people in our country. The climate and ecological emergency requires immediate actions with long-term consequences that our politicians, with their short-term view and party political allegiances, seem unable to enact. But there is another way. It's called deliberative democracy. There are many different models of deliberative democracy, but one thing they all share is putting local people at the centre of decision making. Citizens' assemblies are a form of deliberative democracy. They randomly select a cross-section of citizens who reflect the demographic of the community. They learn about and discuss an issue in order to come up with suggestions or solutions together. The third demand of Extinction Rebellion is a legally binding National Citizens' Assembly to address the climate and ecological emergency. It needs to be legally binding so that people can believe in it. So it's not just a talking shop whose recommendations get ignored, but because that just confirms that ordinary people are not trusted or listened to when it comes to important issues. Extinction Rebellion don't want to run it, they just want to see it happen. It's also a very good process for local councils to run a scaled down version called a citizens' jury. There's many guides on how to run a citizens' assembly. I don't have to run through all of it right here. Look it up, Google it. And there's lots of organizations set up to run them. But the important thing is that they inform and educate a cross-section of the local population on the issues and problems of that community. and they deliberate the issues themselves and they thrash out a consensus on decisions and actions. They could be set up so the rest of the community can follow the process. They can read it or watch it online. They can relate to the people involved because they're just like them, and they come up with the type of solutions they would. The process builds trust and it empowers local communities to be involved in important decisions and solutions. To empower is to enrich both the community and the decision making. Citizens' assemblies are very good at finding solutions to complex, involved, and contentious issues. They also shift people's perceptions from entrenched views to more collaborative solutions. This is not some newfangled, mysterious process. There's a growing movement across the world of deliberative democracy. There have been at least 19 citizens' assemblies in the UK alone over the last 2 years. The Leeds Climate Commission developed one to address a local response to the climate emergency 2 years ago. Here in Bradford, we need to find ways to involve communities in decision making that affects their lives. The climate and the ecological emergency, which scientists believe resulted in our current climate pandemic, is best solved by more people being involved in the development of a greener recovery for us all. That puts the climate and our own well-being at the centre of our future vision for Bradford. Okay, that's it.
Paul, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I know you're very passionately in favour of lots of the elements of Citizens' Assembly. One of the things that I just want to pick up on there that you said about immediate actions, and I'm going to talk with the panel about it as well, because we're all coming from, we all want for the same things to happen. We all want a sustainable environment. We heard Hugh talk about his kids. You've got kids, I've got kids, and we want to have a sustainable future for them. When you say immediate actions, and it's one of the criticisms of XR, isn't it, that perhaps they're too immediate, how would you respond to that? I know we've had this conversation before.
Okay, 2020 was the hottest year on record. The last 3 hottest years on record have been in the last decade. It's moving faster than we even care to think about, and a lot of stuff needs to happen right now. And I know that people are thinking, oh well, what's different? It's nice it being a bit warmer, but you look at 98% of climate scientists are saying it's already maybe too late. So like the time is now. It's not waiting. It's not 5-year plans. It's not 10-year plans. It's now. It's now that we've got to do something. And like it's only the pandemic that stopped us escalating some of our actions. But I think there's a few things in the pipeline. We're going to think about how we're going to do it a bit more COVID safe. But watch the space for doing that. But it's like every speaker on here is talking about things that needs to happen. It needed to happen yesterday. But the only way that we're going to actually make things happen is through collaborations between ourselves, with right-minded people getting together and looking at how we're going to affect change. So it's about Labour Party, Green Party, non-political people, all sorts have to get together and look at how we're going to solve this, because nobody can do it on their own, and we need everybody. Even the Tories, we even need, that kills me to say it, but we even need them on our side to see what the problems are.
Thanks, Paul. I love the fact that you talk about collaboration and time of being of the essence, and I will come back to the rest of the panel and we'll bring those points up. That nearly concludes all of our panel. I've also got with me now Gabriella Alberti. Hi, Gabriella. Thank you for being so patient and waiting for us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Pav, and thanks for inviting me to this very important program.
But please, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so my name is Gabriella. I come from Italy, but I've been living in Leeds for many years now. And since 2017, I've been a member of the Commoners Choir, which some of you might know already. You have already listened to one of our songs. So the choir really is an open, inclusive group that welcomes everyone who wants to sing for equality, freedom, and also some of our songs tackle these critical questions such as the climate crisis. Apart from that, like many other members of the choir, I'm also an activist myself. I teach at the University of Leeds, and I'm part of the University College Union that set up a group that is focusing on the ecological and climate crisis. And together with a group of students, we set up a coalition, the Student Staff Coalition for the Climate. You can find us on Facebook. We are trying to hold the University of Leeds to account when it comes to the so-called principles to cut emissions and to turn our campus in a carbon-free campus. Of course, the University of Leeds is one of the largest employers in the region, and it's absolutely important that these processes of democratic decision-making, putting scientific research into action, starting from our own workplace, is absolutely central. I've been delighted to work with our students who are really full of energy and ideas about greening the curriculum, about expanding education to everyone on the very urgent question of climate action. As part of the Commonwealth Choir, I've been involved in walks and singing events that are always connected to bring these important global questions to the attention of the people. I'm very pleased today that I'm going to introduce a song written by our Bof Welly on the north, the region where we all live. True North, which is a song that you are about to listen to, is a song that talks about place and our connection to the place where we live. You will hear how important is the representation of the physical landscape and the walking through and the climbing up the hills in Yorkshire. For me, it was a very magical moment to learn about this country and this region through these songs, because it really tells you a lot about the importance of learning about the history of a place. Only through a physical connection to our land we can really understand the importance of saving it. So I think you will pay attention to some of the the parts of this song that goes back to the way this land was built, and it goes back to the importance of the relationship between humans and nature. So the way we transform nature through work. It used to be, the cotton mills and the steel industry. And now perhaps this is the time where we have to think about a way of relating to our nature differently.
Gabriella, thank you very much. And I think we've got that video coming up now. We'll see you in a little while. Thank you, Gabriella.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome.
Grit the stone beneath us, grit to say we dare, grit that built our cities, grit the badge we wear. Grit the stone beneath us, grit to say we dare, grit that built our cities, grit the badge we wear. By the river, stone beneath us, all we say we dare, grit that built our cities, after dark the badge we wear. See John Walker, stone beneath us, with common sense to say we dare, change the world that built our city, with a tiny spark that badge we wear. Here's the spark, to light the fire, here's the road, to hold the sail, here's the call, to feed the engine, here's the strength, to build the rail. We journeyed from the rocket to the bluebird, right around the earth, a compass for our hearts, the needle points to north, points to north, points to north. History's needle points to north. Grit the stone beneath us, grit to say we dare, grit that built our cities, grit the badge we wear. Along the stone beneath us, cities. With paint and grip the badge we wear. Here's the sound of Irish fiddle. Here's the siren and the bell that call them all to the factory all along the ship canal. We dance between the libraries and the galleries. We skipped across the earth, a compass for a heart. The needle points to north, points to north, points to north. History's needle points to north. The stone beneath us, grit to say we dare. Grit that built our cities, grit the badge we wear. Heading down along the valley, say we dare. From the front that built our cities to the free badge we wear. Climb the hill beneath us that defines us, say we dare. Spun in cotton built our cities, forged in free badge we wear. Here's the hand wrote the story. Here's the arm that mined the coal. And here's 1,000 government ministers who gave us bugger all, bugger all. Mountains, bugger out along the country lanes by nature or design. There's home up past the meadows and there's home we left behind. We climb to limestone pavements where it rains for 50 weeks. And all our favourite seats of power are trig points on the peaks. We clambered over cliches to make our way this far. It's landscape and it's weather that can shape the way we are. The grit we have in common and the grit stuck in the lens. The grit where flattened days begin and BBC pronunciation ends. The stone beneath us, grit to say we dare. Grit that built our cities, grit the badge we wear. All the stone beneath us, and the grit to say we dare. The renegade past that built our cities, in the city square. Grit the badge we wear. The off-country stone beneath us, and the grit to say we dare. Building bridges that built our cities, across the air. Grit the badge we wear. Here's the sign of spinning Jenny. Here's the Luna to burn the mill. Here's the valley cut by Navy from the factory to the hills. We traced the path from red brick out to limestone. We walked across the earth, a compass for a heart. The needle points to north, points to north, points to north. History's needle points to north, points to north, points to north. History's needle points to north, points to north.
And that's Commoners Choir, True North, absolutely fantastic. I have seen Commoners Choir a few times myself, and I know some members of it, and I'm a big fan. Gabriella, did you want to conclude or tell us any more about Commoners Choir or that song before we move on?
Yeah, it's always emotional to listen to it again, and yeah, I just want to say, check out our Facebook page, check our website. At the moment, of course, we can't meet to sing together because of COVID, and we are suffering a lot from it. But I'm sure we can find other ways to continue, sing together in different ways. And I think connecting arts and politics through also initiatives like this, radio programs is great. So let's keep up our fight for the climate.
Gabriella, thank you very much. And I will echo that the videos are absolutely fantastic and the stories that they tell are very, very important. Thank you very much. I think we're going to come back to right, we're going to come back. We're just going to open it up a little bit now to have a discussion. We've all had a few moments to think, to reflect on what's been said already. Hugh, I'd like to come back to you first, if I may, please. You've heard all of our other speakers. You've listened to some of the things that Commoners Choir have sung about as well. Is there anything that particularly resounds with you? But any connection that you can see? Any way that we can work together more collaboratively?
Well, that's a big question. And first of all, yeah, thank you. I love Gabriella's choir and the music, and being from Huddersfield, it's always good to see the Luddites referenced. So being the home of the Luddites, so no, fantastic. And I think one of the themes I picked out from that is history, and I think knowing where we came from is important if we're going to know where we're going to go to. So I'm very much future focused, and I think Paul raised a good point about the need for action now and the fact that really we should have been doing more stuff in the last decade. I can share his frustration. I was actually at the COP in 2009 in Copenhagen, which was supposed to be the big COP, the one that we were going to agree everything and get everything right, and that didn't happen, famously. And I think the frustration has lived with me ever since, right? So that's why I talked about 2021 being really, for me, the last big chance, really. We do in November, obviously, host the COP for this year that was held over from last year. So on an international level, absolutely necessary that something happens. But the thing that resonates for me, and I think came out of everyone's presentation, is we do need to be able to derive and bring things down to a local level. And I think that applies whether you're talking about investment, as Ali did, whether you're talking about politics, as Paul did, or whether you're talking about technology and structure, as some of the other speakers did. And let me say why I mean that, because if you take on a very basic level the point that Ali was making about the West Yorkshire Pension Fund and the frustration that she has that I share, actually, to some extent, the structure and the system are wrong, right? And this aligns with the conversation we had about Galba and the airport. I think we need to be a bit careful about blaming individuals or planning teams or councillors, etc., because actually the system's against them. The airport wants to expand because our economy wants growth. It wants growth. That's the whole basis of international economies at the moment, is that we grow. Our GDP has to grow year on year, and that is our economic theory of how the world goes forward and how we redistribute wealth. If we grow, we can redistribute a bit of wealth further down. Fundamentally, that's broken. That doesn't work, right? And it doesn't work because it's not socially just. It's not redistributing anywhere near the way it should do. And actually, all the analysis, even during the lockdown in this last year, has been that wealth continues to go to the richest people, right? Because they own the assets, etc., etc. But it's also terrible for our environment. We've outgrown our environment, and that's the whole point about growth, is that we need to keep growing. We need to keep digging out more minerals, mining more oil, having more flights, wearing more clothes. That's the fundamental basis of growth. So I think until we change that a little bit, we're kind of not going to have the big change that Paul wants. And so fundamental for me, that is the idea of localism. You know, if we can have more local use of investment, so that all of us as individuals can invest in something that is going to be better for us, whether it's social care, whether it's on the transport system that we've all said that we want, whether it's on improving our landscape, on flood defense, on housing, as we've talked about. You know, that's the fundamental questions. And actually history there is instructive to come back to the start of this. If we go back 150 years, those cooperative movements were one of the bedrocks of our initial you know, social and democratic institutions. But we lost that in the middle, if we're honest, we lost that in the middle of the 20th century, and we aggregated everything into centralized, nationalized, top-down, and then internationalized systems. And that might not have happened if it wasn't for the events of the Second World War, right, where we then had to nationalize everything and centralize everything. So I think that's the fundamental question of our time, is how we decentralize things. And let me just finish by saying, because you talked about me being a safe pair of hands and that kind of stuff. In 2009, I actually wrote a paper for the then Labour government about decentralizing our energy system. Waste Not, Want Not is the paper for CERA, and we published it alongside the Labour government. And that was because of fundamental belief I had even then, when I looked around the system and researched it, that actually one of the things that holds us back, and it still holds us back now, is our centralized, nationalized energy system. You know, it's very difficult within that system to really become fully renewable, to really become as efficient as we want in terms of our heating systems, to really put a focus on retrofitting our buildings. And so, you know, that is really where I think we need to push towards. And you know, your question about how can we do something about it now? Well, devolution is the answer, right? It's not the perfect deal, and I think I've said that many times. But this is an opportunity as we take power in West Yorkshire. If we do it right, it is an opportunity to start to break things up and bring things back down here. And the final thing I'll just say is, you know, Paul doesn't need to convince me on the Citizens Assembly stuff. I think one of my pledges when I was campaigning was I fundamentally believe in them. I think they're a fantastic form of bringing things back down to a local level. So just some thoughts and hopefully some news.
Thanks, Hugh. I'm just going to, Ali, I'm going to just come to you in a moment, please. And it's a similar point. It's something that somebody else has asked, but it was on my mind as well. David G has said, as a West Yorkshire Pension Fund member, I am appalled by how slowly the powers that be are acting on this. By investing in renewables, green transport initiatives, etc., they can still protect our pensions. Now, you've mentioned, you've talked about these points already, but it's the pace at which we do things. And, you know, Paul's mentioned it, Hugh's mentioned it a few moments ago. Manny talked about it when Manny talked about things earlier in his piece. How can we speed things up? Because the time is of the essence, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd agree with whoever's put that question. I mean, there is a real problem in the inertia, I feel, within the pension fund. Some of us have, well, I've been fully campaigning on this for 4 years. Others have been doing it for longer, and we've been to AGMs, we've asked questions, and so far there's sort of very little effect. Across the country and across the world, there's been much more movement on divestment from fossil fuels in the whole range of different councils, pension funds, universities, cities that have made commitments to divest. West Yorkshire feels like the dinosaur here, and I think it is a real problem for us. What we are doing is trying to talk to councillors and people on the investments panel to help the councillors who are in charge of these decisions on how the money is invested, to be asking the right questions of their financial managers, and to keep asking those questions. Say, why don't we have a plan? You know, that a lot of I can understand and accept that you can't suddenly get rid of all your investments in one thing overnight. But you can plan over a period of 1, 2, 3, or even 4 years to start moving those investments elsewhere. And there's no sign at all that the West Yorkshire Pension Fund has any intention or there's no indication that they've got any kind of plan at all. And that's one of the things that Mark Carney was driving home in his brief lecture was the need to have a plan to move towards net zero. And Bradford Council has a plan towards net zero. Well, it has indicated its intention. So has Wicker, West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Why has the pension fund not got a plan? And just on the financial side of things, there's no reason why the pension fund couldn't be a partner in, say, something really new and exciting and interesting for West Yorkshire, and set up some kind of green investment bank. I'm sure there must be people around West Yorkshire who are talking about this sort of thing. And it's not something I know very much about at all, but it's something that could be an opportunity for the future, and the pension fund should be in there. But yeah, they should have a plan to do it. And just a bit of background, a couple of years ago, I met with the investments committee of the National Trust to discuss with them about their finances and the fact that they still were investing in fossil fuels. And within a short time of our group meeting with those people, they decided they could divest their fossil fuel holdings. It's a much smaller organisation, obviously, than our West Yorkshire Pension Fund. But they decided they could do it, and they could do it within 3 years, but probably much quicker than that. So there's no real excuse for anyone to say, oh, we can't do it.
Thanks, Sally. Manny and Alistair, thank you for staying with us, Alistair. Paul and XR mentioning about the having a citizens' assembly. Hugh thinks it's a great idea. Can you come up with how the citizens' assembly may or may not help something like the Leeds Bradford airport expansion? I mean, if there was a citizens' assembly and they decided, actually, yes, we want a bigger, brighter, better airport, how would we all feel about that?
I'll answer that one. There has been a citizens' jury, and barring 2 of the 19, they all voted that the expansion of Leeds Bradford Airport should not take place. Unfortunately, the reaction of the Leeds City Council to that was they had a meeting about 6 or 8 weeks later in January the 7th, at which they produced their document and their policy statement on airport expansion, and said, well, yes, we have a climate emergency, but no, the law effectively says that we can't take that into account. Now, this has been one of the big areas of dispute, because in fact the law does not say that. But this is where it's really tricky for plans panel members, because they are informed by position statements, and one of them is a legal statement which Leeds City Council refuses to actually publish. It's a bizarre situation. And I would say quite, I think when Paul talked about some of the problems, it's one of these exercises in my mind particularly is why people are not in climate denial. They don't deny there's a climate crisis, but why they can't make the move to actually take, in the case of Leeds, this is the single most important decision which will affect greenhouse gas emissions from our area. And it's going to be taken on probably on the 11th of February, and it's taken by 13 people, and we have no idea yet where they're going to go, but we know that the council seem to be in favour of it, because Judith Blake, the leader, said so herself. 2 weeks after they declared the emergency, they announced that they actually welcomed the expansion of Leeds Bradford Airport. It's just completely contradictory.
So thanks for sharing that, Alistair. I wasn't aware of that, and it goes back to the point that Paul was making about being effective, and how can we raise the profile of these things, and that's what causes the frustration, isn't it? Paul, can I just come to you, please? Just a point that somebody else has made, that really interesting ideas raised by XR. Perhaps the already elected representatives could be put through the same education and training program that is required for the randomly selected citizens' assembly. I can see you laughing away there.
Yeah. Obviously, that would be a very good idea. But I think it's got to be local people. It's got to be who believes what politicians say at whatever level, who actually believes what they say. If they're going to say to you, you can't go on your flight, you can't do this, you can't do that, that's no good. It's just people telling people what to do. The process only works if local people are involved in it. Then if local people are involved in it, the other people can see it and say, well, that's just like me. I relate to that. I relate to that person. And if they can follow that, I've got no problem with the politicians following that. But our government held a citizens' assembly on climate last year. What happened to that? Any recommendation they put through, oh, that's very interesting, but that's no good. That's no good. If you're going to have a citizens' assembly, it has to consist of local people. It has to consist of people from all different backgrounds, so it reflects what your community is made up of. Then it could have some effect, because people have to be able to relate to it. And it's really important who sets it up. I think it's got to be an independent organisation that sets it up. I mean, there's lots of them around now. Involve is one of them. They've got a lot of practice in doing this stuff, and it's got to be legally binding. That's the crucial bit. If 80% of the people agree with this, then we will enact it. That has to be the bottom line. In Ireland, that's what they did, and they had really contentious issues about gay marriage and abortion, but they managed to do it. If they could do that there, why the fuck can't we do that here? Sorry, excuse me. But,
it's good to, Paul, it's good to be passionate. And I love the fact that you're passionate, and I love the fact that everybody has been passionate today, and everybody has been able to articulate their point. And I think, Ludi, I'm just going to come to you, if I may. The thing that people say is, how does this affect me? What can I do about it? So really on the really local level, on the granular level, what can people do? How can people get involved? How can people make change before we get citizens' assembly?
Okay. Well, first of all, if you're asking me and the Bradford Shipley Travel Alliance, we're just beginning, and we have a sort of embryo website, Bradford Shipley Travel Alliance, bsta.org.uk. Look that up and you'll be able to sign up. And so that's in terms of how to get involved with others who are already thinking about it. Actually, what you can do, it is really tough. I mean, because you need to be able to shift really major priorities about where things are being invested. From at the moment where it's very much driven by where private investment might be made. So the whole business about roads is based on, as Hugh was saying, the idea that, oh, if we have inward investment from people who have pots of money, why, when they come to Bradford, they won't come because we haven't got big enough roads and motorways and so on. So we'll build those, and that will attract people in. But who does it attract in? It attracts people in who would like to see less regulation, would like to spend less and take more money out. And this whole idea of investment is absolutely contrary to being able to do something together collectively that makes good of the environment. And the environment is a public space. So it's really hard. So at the same time as being able to talk politely and convincingly to your local politicians, you also need the in-your-face actions that show the really clear emergency that we're in, that everybody accepts but forgets because you don't see it taken seriously. And at the same time, you need to think, well, actually, I could live slightly differently too, and all that good example is important. So there you go. Not much to do.
Thanks, Ludi. Gabriella, I don't know if I can bring you in on you've heard a number of the points that the panel have made. What do you think we can do on the local level to start to really affect change much more quickly? I think we're all in broad agreement here that we need to start moving things along much more quickly than they are doing. There is a fear that once the pandemic is over, people just want to go back to whatever normal was as quickly as they possibly can, and there'll be exponential growth again. And you heard Hugh mention that we can't live in that way. It's just unsustainable. What can we do to sort of it is putting the brakes on things, isn't it? Or making us think in a different way. What can we do? What do you think we can do?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the discussions about growth and degrowth are absolutely central. And I want to be positive in the sense that the majority of people have understood that the current pandemic crisis is directly linked with the climate crisis and the wider ecological crisis. What is clear is that some businesses and politicians will try to pit the economy against kind of a more kind of green sustainable recovery, but actually the reality is that this is precisely the moment when we can think differently. And I think in terms of behavioral change and like everyday practices, unless we build a truly transversal alliances, things are not going to change. So I believe that the labor movement has been too shy until now in terms of, taking a clear stance on the agenda. So I'm very pleased that finally we have the trades, the trades council, the regional trades council, extremely active on the question of climate change and, retrofitting of housing and thinking seriously about the energy question, which I think is absolutely central. But then we need more opportunities like today's where, I can learn from Ali about the stuff about pension, which should be my own union fight as well. I can learn more about local initiatives and residents initiatives. And unless we kind of, make that kind of citizens assembly model of deliberation and action from below more, universal. Like we extend it to different forms of coalitions, then things are not going to change. We need to be honest about the different interests that sometimes exist, but also be able to listen to everyone's voice in order to then understand what is the common battle, which is saving our own lives and the climate and the planet.
And thanks, Gabrielle. Hugh, if I could come to you, too shy, disappointed with socialism, disappointed with the Labour Party. I mentioned this before when we started the discussion. It's something that I've found a little bit difficult. That there was this idea of having a whole green agenda from the Labour Party, that we were going to have a greening of the environment, that there was going to be some real purpose behind it, that our job creation was going to be a part and parcel of it. And it does, I think Gabrielle is spot on there, that the Labour Party does seem to be shy of that. Is it a vote loser? Is it a vote loser for the Labour Party to get on board greening our world, greening our environment? I mean, you've got kids, I saw them yesterday. I've got kids, we've all have family. It's so important that we have a nice environment for them to be in, and we're throwing it away, aren't we, Hugh? And the Labour Party is just running away from it.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess a couple of reflections. But first of all, we're not in power, right? I think that, we've got to start from where we are. So the Labour Party isn't in power, and no, we're not, other than a few local authorities, right, and some of the metropolitan mayors. So that's one of the key things, isn't it? And you're right. Maybe we haven't put it front and center of some of our manifesto and campaigns. And so I'm glad that Gabriella raised the point about it does always tie back into the economy, doesn't it? And too often this debate becomes a binary choice between economy and environment, or between economy and health, right? And that's very live at the moment, isn't it? How on earth do we manage to let this happen, and how can it be more important than the economy? And so, but still, people are having this discussion about the economy and health, which doesn't make sense, right? Because if you're not healthy, you can't possibly have an economy, and if you don't have a planet, you can't possibly have an economy. So it's common sense, but then once we get into elections, that becomes the fault line, right? And for Labour and for the progressive side of politics, it's just been something that's been very difficult for 20 years, if we're honest. Now, in the US, I think they've just had some of those debates, and they still didn't win, if we're honest. You know, they only won by a few million votes. So it's not like they won an overwhelming majority of people. Not 60% of the population said that. You know, just over 50% were sort of saying that they supported something along that line. So it is something that we still have to win as a global debate. And that's why I say 2021 is a really important time. But as Gabriella was saying, we do have to come up with something that weaves society, economy, and environment all into one thread, which is why I come back to this thing about growth, because actually, you know, and it comes back to the debate we had about the airport. We must be very careful about making it about people and saying too many people choose to go flying, it's their fault, they don't want to do it, because it isn't actually about people, it's about structural choices. So actually we have to move this, and this is something that Mark Carney's been very astute about, and others have said. We should be talking about businesses, structure, the politicians, the businesses, the economy. How do we make them, what interventions do we put in place that makes them take responsibility for this? Because actually the people we should be saying, we should be giving clear narratives and direction to are the businesses that, in terms of Leeds Bradford Airport, is Leeds Bradford Airport itself and the people who use it, the airlines, etc., etc. And one of the things Mark Carney's been quite clear about, which I think is perhaps some of the things we should be talking about in terms of our narrative, is saying, in order to meet our 2030 and 2050 targets, which are already clear in international law and local law and national law, etc., and European law and everything, there needs to be some technological movement, right, on air traffic, because actually, what we want as a society is we want to be able to move around. We want to be able to move around quickly. We want to be able to do it environmentally and health-wise and all sorts of otherwise safely. So the challenge to you, industry, is to do that, to meet all of those goals. And so we'll let you expand the airport, but only when you can do it in a way that's safe, right? And you've got nothing in your plans, and both Paul and Alistair are absolutely right. There's nothing in your plans that meet our targets. So until you can meet those targets and tell us, and this is the challenge that he's put out there, Mark Carney, is to say, a third of what we know we can already reduce by a third in terms of existing technology. We know there's another third that we're on track to do, but there's another third of the whole agenda that we just can't do. We don't have the technology, and airlines is a very good example. There's not the technology. We can't decarbonize by 2030 or 50 at the moment. And so really we should be turning this on them and saying, until you can come forward with a strategy, which I think, you know, Manny and Paul and others have said, and Alistair, till written into your plans is a strategy that gets us there by in 21, 25 and 2030, you're not going to expand your airport, you're not going to do other things. So that's really, and to come back to your question about the Labour Party, yeah, we should be bold, and Gabriella's right. Well, our next manifesto, and I've said for this manifesto, and you know, lucky, and as I say, I've had very encouraging conversations with Tracy. We will put some ambitious stuff in, but you know, that's important that this whole movement comes behind Tracy in West Yorkshire and helps her develop that, and helps us put in place these strong principles. And what I'd say is be hopeful. Let's not be, you know, I think within all of our environmental sector, there's probably a bit of learned helplessness because things haven't happened. But don't be that way. I think let's be hopeful. Let's it's our time. That's what I'm saying. 2021 is our time. Let's be positive. Let's be hopeful, and let's go into this with.
Thanks, Hugh.
You know,
Paul,
really
I'll come back to you in just a moment. Manny, so are you hopeful?
I'm quite hopeful. I am. I mean, I think there's one or two points I just wanted to make.
Yes.
Because we've been mentioning Leeds Bradford Airport quite a bit, and you know, arguments and stuff. I mean, I think yes, there is always going to be a tension between jobs and you know how that's prioritised next to something like dealing with the climate. But there's something much more straightforward about Leeds Bradford Airport, and that is that their arguments that they will attract business and they will be good for the local economies is actually a false argument, and that's really important to stress. And this is something that has been trotted out by all sorts of people, leaders of councils. You know, the Leeds Council have argued strongly. Wicker has argued strongly. Bradford Council has argued that we should be going for this airport expansion, but it's based on a false premise. And this is something that was highlighted by the New Economics Foundation, who applied really the latest and most comprehensive analysis to the Leeds Bradford Airport plans. And it showed that actually it will result in money going out of the region. Maybe a few more jobs, but people will take those flights and spend their money abroad. So, you know, once you take that into account, you have to then begin to think, you know, this is not being sold to us honestly.
Yes.
So yes, Leeds Bradford Airport itself might make a profit, but it's not going to be advantageous for the region as a whole. And these sorts of facts have not really been discussed, in our region. That they're important to be laid out in front of people. People deserve to know these things.
Thanks, man. Thank you. I'm afraid we're running out of time. And Paul, I will come to you. We're right at the end of the show. What I will do is, I think we've got maybe a minute or so. So if everybody could maybe have a minute or so to make a point. So Paul, I'll start with you. I know you need more than a minute, but I'm only going to give you a minute.
Okay. I want to come back to what do we do? And I think right at the minute, Tories got an 80 majority, yeah? No. Yeah, they got it. Yeah. So how did they do that? Because they own the bloody media. So it doesn't really matter what you do. You've got to educate people. You've got to do that. And citizens' assemblies is one of the ways to do it. Local communities finding out about issues, discussing it between themselves, coming up with solutions. So it doesn't matter what the Sun says. It doesn't matter what the Telegraph says. Because if you're just waiting for elections to get power, you're not going to get it. You have to educate people where they are about the issues that's important to them. And some of that is through local committees, local citizens' assemblies, local juries. Because once you're educated, you don't lose it, yeah? Then you stop reading. Like Liverpool, they don't even allow the Sun into Liverpool, for God's sakes. That's what proper action is. That's proper working class action. And that's what we need to do.
Paul, thank you for your thoughts. Paul, thank you for your thoughts and your passion. Thank you very much. Ali, if you could, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. If you had a thought or two to conclude with.
It's been really interesting hearing everyone else's views and how so much all this links so much. Just coming back to the money side, it is important where the money is invested, and I think we do. Much as I hate talking about money, actually, I do think it's important to be aware of any money that we might have in a bank or a building site or a pension fund, and really try and look for where you can actually ask the questions and make a difference. Get these funds to remove them from anything that is wrecking the climate, because it can't wait. It's urgent, and I think that's the most important thing. And why not look at ways of supporting the West Yorkshire economy to make it greener while you're doing it.
Ali, thank you. Hugh, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Thanks for all the things that you've said. I wasn't trying to be harsh earlier. I was just trying to inject some urgency, I suppose, because all of us feel very, very strongly about it. We know that there is a climate emergency. The Council have said that there's a climate emergency. Now with Trump gone, America's going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. So maybe on a global scale, things will start to change as well. And I didn't mean to put you in the spotlight in a negative way. And I know that you do lots and lots of good work. But just in a few words, what can we do more immediately?
Well, I guess without being too much of a plug, next, and it's just gone up on, it'll just go up on Facebook later, but next Sunday we have a debate hosted by Sarah, which will be attended by Tracy and councillors from across the region. It's intended as an opportunity for people like everyone on this call to make their points and to make sure they're heard by Tracy and that they go into the manifesto. So I think that's the first thing, and that answers directly your challenge, which is a good one, about Labour needs to be more positive and do something more. And also I think it answers Paul's challenge about having, exactly as he said, events and opportunities where people can talk across different areas and in some ways talk truth to power. The final thing I'll also say is no one should lose sight of the detail, and Manny's talked about the detail of the actual West Yorkshire devolution deal, right? So within that, there's obviously transport, which is a critical bit of this. There is discretionary spending that could be put into things like flooding, roads, etc. And then most importantly, there is a very I don't use shady in the sense of dishonourable or dishonest. I mean in the sense of it's not clear how it's going to work. But there is an opportunity to develop a West Yorkshire spatial strategy. And that's not to say that it'll override all the planning between the 5 local authorities, because it won't. But it will allow for a combined West Yorkshire spatial strategy to pick up some of the things we talked about. So airport expansion, does that fit within the spatial strategy? Roads, as has been talked about, you know, by our colleague, you know, how does that fit? How do we expand roads? And for me, there's a critical question, you know, if you look at, and this comes back to Gabriella's point, if you look at our area, is it just going to all merge into one big super city in the next 30 years, which is the way it seems to be going, you know, like a super London? Or do we want it to be something different? That's the fundamental question we need to answer. And if it's going to be something different, what does that look like? So, you know, it's important that, you know, 4 months until the election, that spatial strategy, we need to be already campaigning and saying to Tracy and to the other candidates where we want that to look like.
Thanks, Hugh. Manny, Alistair, I don't know which one of you wants to come in. Do we want a super London? Do we need a super airport to serve a super London in the north?
Alistair, do you want to?
Well, one reason I voted for Hugh in the recent Labour Party election for the candidate was in fact because Tracy Babin actually supports Leeds Bradford expansion and said that she is excited with the prospect of the great international connectivity. This image of Leeds Bradford, the conurbation growing bigger and better, and it just doesn't fit with the sustainability of our one and only planet. And I suppose one thing that I get comfort from attending meetings like this is that I think every person here, when asked by their children or their grandchildren in 2050, and I probably won't still be alive, is what did you do about it when the time came 30 years ago? And I suppose the thing is that we're all trying to do our bit, and collectively we're probably more effective than individually. So by nature, I'm an optimist, but when I look around at what happens in the world, sometimes I get quite pessimistic and quite anxious. But there's a lovely phrase in psychotherapy, which is activity is an antidote to anxiety. And by being active, by trying to do something, it means that we haven't put our heads in the sand and pretended that it's going to be all right and we can carry on as before. And that is a stressful situation at times, but it is worth going down this path. So thank you for letting me sit in on this, because it's been wonderful.
Thank you for your thoughts, Alistair. Ludi, any concluding thoughts from you?
Yes, if I could just say maybe 3 short things. One is I'm optimistic. I've always been optimistic. But it's not based on a sort of a hope in some elected leader will do what I want them to do. It's based on some optimism that that communities can have confidence to demand what they need, and that's the only way things change. Second thing is this: we haven't mentioned a concept that I think is going to be really important, and that's a sort of 15-minute city in answer to a super city, that everybody should live somewhere that's a neighbourhood where their housing and their walkways and their facilities and their shops are all such that they can go within 15 minutes, walking or cycling, to get what they need, to get most of what they need. And that suddenly puts a different picture on the kind of investment in the kind of housing, in the kind of traffic and so on, that leads to the third point, which is all this involves jobs and work. And what about the Green New Deal? And just look out towards the end of March and towards the end of April, there are 2 days of action by the Green New Deal UK that locally will be hopefully in your face in one way or another. Thank you. Thank you very much, Pav and Bradford Transform.
Ludi, thank you very much. I was just going to ask Gabriella to introduce the last act for us, but just before we, just Commoners Choir, and get off your arse, if you could tell us a little bit about that in just a few moments, Gabriella. I'm just going to sign off. Can I just say thank you very, very much to Hugh Goulburn from Sarah, West Yorkshire. And you've got a show next week on Sunday. Thank you very much, Hugh. To Ali Stouffer from West Yorkshire, Fossil Free West Yorkshire Pension Fund, Alistair Cameron and Manny McKenzie from Galba. Ludi Simpson from Bradford Shipley Traveller Alliance, and Paul McHugh from Extinction Rebellion. Gabriella, Commoners Choir, to see us off for the afternoon.
Yes, absolutely. I think Alistair Cameron already said it very nicely before. We need to keep active in order to change things. And so this song now is a celebration of action and hope, and the fact that it's everyone's responsibility, as well as, bigger structures having to be changed, of course. So get off your arse is a universal message for transformation.
Stay safe, get off your arse. Thank you.
Life is going to start when I find myself living in a proper civilized society, where young people stand up when they feel that some injustice is done, because they don't. People don't stand up. They will not stand up. They sit back and they say, oh, this is a great pity, and that's that.
So everybody likes the idea of somebody getting up and fighting back, but the trouble is pessimism means that most people think there's no point in being that one.
Get off your ass! Get off your ass! Get off your ass! Get off your ass! Get off your ass and do something. 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 Get off your ass! Get off your ass! Get off your ass! Get off your ass! Get off your knees and stand up. Let's 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 get off your knees and stand up. Get off your ass! Get off your ass! Get off your ass! Get off your ass!
It's also a positive song. It's about how people pulled together in the communities after the floods, and everyone came together from the valley, from all different places. People fed us, people cleaned up people's houses, people pulled together and rebuilt the community, and it's about that, people pulling together, creating change and rebuilding society, which is what we can all do.
Pull together, 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 pull. All the rain it falls, and the waters rise. We're waiting in the valleys, they're sitting high and dry. They get the photo in the papers, we get the same old lies. Oh, the rain it falls, and the waters rise. We are the people's armada, we're sailing all together, from the Don to the Humber, from the Calder to the Clyde. There's a river of anger that we forged in the water. We are the people's armada, coming in on the tide. We're piling up the sandbags, they're digging up the peat bogs. We're bailing out the basements, while they're bailing out the banks. They're flooding out the valleys, for the glorious 12. We are the people in common, against self, self, self. We are the people's armada, we're sailing all together, from the Don to the Humber, from the Calder to the Clyde. There's a river of anger that we forged in the water. land is my land, from Falmouth Harbour to Shetland Islands, from Snowdon's mountains to the North Sea wall.